Hello, this is Russell Earl. I'm giving my DVD version of my report of the work that Stacy Ferguson and I did in the Marshall Islands of February 27th to March 15th of this year, 2014. Brother Stacy Ferguson, who traveled with me, is the assistant director of the Pacific Islands Bible College. And the picture you're looking at is a picture of Majuro Atoll, one of the many islands or one of the many atolls that make up the Marshall Islands. You can see the shape of the island there, and you also have different little islands that kind of uh, go around it. If you put them all together, it'd make a circle, but it kind of makes a C here, as you can see. Uh, Much of the island, you can see other parts of it. If you're looking out from the mainland, you can see other islands that are kind of speckled out through there. This picture is actually taken at low tide, and during the low tide, you could walk to the other areas of the island, as you see there, the bottom section of the island. You can see the sand where you can actually walk across to the other islands. This next slide here is taken from one of the uh, ends of the island, actually the end that we were on. Uh, you could look out and see the other island, and if you're there in person, you can see the pipes running underneath the water down through the sand to the other island. I was told there actually was, I think he says, fiber optic cable that's running from Guam down to the other islands. And I think on this case, running from Majuro to this other island, it's actually sending power over to the other islands. Uh, there actually also is many islands they just simply use generators to create power. So if it's not power, then it may be fiber optic cable or other utilities being sent through the pipe to the other island. This third slide, you can see a picture or a map rather of the South Pacific. You can see the Marshall Islands circled in red. You can see it's just to the east of Micronesia, and further off to the west you can see the Philippines. It's above the Solomon Islands and northeast of Australia. Not that far away when you look at the miles from the Marshall Islands. And this next slide or picture, you can see this is just of the Marshall Islands. This is not all of them. Some are smaller. Some are just not on this map. But you can see Majuro there on the lower right hand side. You can see Majuro, and that's where we were at. We flew in actually from Honolulu into Majuro, and then after we landed in Majuro, the plane would go on and land on two other smaller islands, and then it would take its last stop in Guam. And when you got ready to leave Majuro and to fly back to the States, it would leave Guam, fly to the other two or three islands it stops at, and then land in Majuro, pick up the other passengers, and then fly on to Honolulu. This next slide here, you can see a picture from the plane. This is a picture that I actually took from the plane. You can see the ocean. It's not that far away, all that blue. Then you can see the bushes, and then you see water on on the side closest to us on the airport. That actually is not ocean water. That is rainwater that they would catch in their tanks, and they would pump that to other places on the island. For instance, the hotel we stayed at would pump water from these catch-em tanks, as they call them, and they would pump that to their different hotel rooms. So when you're showering, you're using that type of water, rainwater, there on the island. This next picture is of a aerial picture of the airport. This is what it looked like if you were able to see straight forward at what you were flying into. Lisa was not impressed with that picture, knowing that I'd be flying in basically straight onto the ocean. And you'll also notice on the lower half you see the road going off, taking you to the other side of the island. And it wasn't uncommon to be driving along and to be able to get out and to walk to one side and see ocean, walk across the road and step another side on the ocean as well. It could be pretty narrow at times. The widest point of the island is 3/4 of a mile, and so didn't take long to get to get across the island. This is me in front of the sign at the airport. Stacy and I had just arrived. This is before we had gone through security and things. This is we'd just gotten off the airplane in Majuro. It's in the 80s year round. This is still wintertime for them, but it never got below 80, and it was around 88, 89 degrees every day. Humidity between 70 to 90%, depending on what time of the day it was. This is a picture of the airport. After you came through security and turned around and looked, this is what you would see when you entered the airport. On my way back on the Friday evening, I came in and we would stand in that open area you see there on the right. Only the restaurant that's there on the left, where you see all the windows, only that area is air conditioned. So when you waited for your plane and to go through security or and get booked and everything, you'd be in the open air part of the airport. And after, on this next slide, this is after we had come through and met with the brethren. They gave Stacy and I these lays and this other type of lay. I don't know what you would call that you put on your head. And they were fresh. You could smell those flowers pretty strong. Stacy, however, has kind of a problem with some of those smells. They affect him. So as soon as we get back to the hotel, he took those things off. But in order not to offend anybody or anything like that, we just kept those on the short ride to the hotel. This next slide is just some basic facts about the island, or about the Marshall Islands in general. You had 29 separate atolls in the Marshall Islands, containing 1,225 islands. The population of all of the Marshall Islands combined is 55,000. The people of the Marshall Islands are predominantly Micronesian in origin. Majuro is the capital of the Marshall Islands, where we were at. We were on Majuro. And the Marshall Islands, they use the US dollar. And the Marshall Islands are only about 7 feet above sea level. This next picture, you can see this is a bridge on the island. This is the highest point of the island. This isn't where the fishing boats would come in. They would come in through the lagoon side. You'll see a picture here in a second. But this is where some of the smaller boats would come out to the other side, where what they call the ocean side, and do their fishing and things on this other side. And they'd pass underneath this bridge, which as you drive across it, isn't really that tall either. This is a picture of the lagoon side. This is actually taken from over by where our hotel was, and you can see the fishing boats and other smaller boats out there on the water, and they would come in through that area, and that was where they would do a lot of their fishing. This next picture, this is our hotel. You can see it's called the Hotel Robert Reimers because of the people there in the islands, the islanders having so little. It was better for us to stay in a hotel. On some of the other islands, as Stacy said, they'd have some other accommodations for you. Sometimes on one island, I think he told me they built a little hut type of thing up off the ground. Him and his son stayed in, but on this island that wasn't the case, and the people had so little, it was better for everyone if we just stayed in a hotel. So this is where we stayed. The bottom level there is just different stores. The top level, the front side is the restaurant, and the back side is the hotel. However, we didn't stay actually in that section. We would walk underneath through the archway there, the opening, and we would stay in, as you'll see in a moment, in our rooms out there, which was a blessing, because in the evening they'd have little mini concerts out there by the harbor area, and so it'd be a little loud. So it was nice for us to not be in the hotel, because it was open late and it can get pretty loud in there. This next slide is a picture of the walkway that would lead out to our room. We stayed in one of these, what they call bungalows. They were divided in half. We were on one side, and the other folks were on the other side. and we walked down this path to our room. This is a picture of, this is part of the property there. You could walk out through, as you see there to the left, you see some tables and things set up. They would rent out that area and the area to the left for people to have little business meetings and things like that. But this is the lagoon side, and you can see the harbor there in the background, where some of those concerts would be taking place. That was a little bit louder in the evening. A few nights there it got pretty loud. This is a picture, this next slide is a picture of our room. We were 402, at least for the first few days we were room 402. Now you can see the roof is supposed to be looking like thatch. However, in your room, that is not real, it's actually just plastic. But in this next picture here, you can see what I call the community building, which is another area they would rent out for meetings and things. That is a real thatch roof, and that is a building that was actually made using different types of materials, trees and things like that. One of our brothers, you see again, this is another picture of our room. I posted a picture of that, and one of our brothers here in the church jokingly made a comment about us roughing it. But a few days later, I think he may have jinxed us. I was lying in bed about 11:30, getting ready to go to sleep, and some bugs started landing on me, and I got up and started looking around. And this next picture you see, I flipped on the light, and you can see in this picture, those are flying termites. Those little black dots are flying termites, and they had come in through the rotted wood that was in the window just above my head and began to swarm. And Stacy, who was staying there in the room with me, saw that. We jumped up and we called the front desk, and we were able to switch rooms. This next picture is a closer picture of some of those termites that died 10 minutes or so later, but they allowed us to switch rooms, and then they came in the next day and cleaned everything up and sprayed and did what they needed to do. In the hotel, it wasn't uncommon for that to happen, is what they told us. But the room was nice, but it wasn't what you would consider over the top. By looking at the outside, it looks really fancy. Some would say kind of like a resort, but things aren't always what they seem in Majuro. In fact, a few days later, you see this next slide. This is a picture of the lagoon out by the hotel. Well, the water pump that pumps the water to our room from the catchment tank, the pump had actually stopped working, so I wasn't able to take a shower. And so I went down to the lagoon I decided I would clean up Islander style. Well, it turns out that a few days before, we'd actually had seen some jellyfish in the water. Stacy actually saw a smaller size squid. So before I got in the water, I looked around to make sure I didn't see anything like that. There were some fish in the water, but nothing, no jellyfish or squid. I was told there wouldn't be any sharks in the lagoon side, but you just never, you don't want to be, you want to be very cautious. So I looked around and make sure there's nothing there. And this next picture, you can see where I was able to step down the steps and get cleaned up at least somewhat. Didn't, kept my clothes on and just cleaned the best I could. But at some point, you got to stick your head underneath the water. So before I did, I looked around again and make sure nothing was swimming around it. Might cause me some grief, and then I cleaned up and came back up. So some interesting things that happened there, but nothing too wild that happened to us while we were there on the islands. This next picture is a picture of the street as you walk out from our hotel. This is what you would see as you cross the parking lot. Directly across the street is a Formosa supermarket, is what they called it. With the exception of maybe one or two, none of the supermarkets were air conditioned, so you did your shopping very quickly. 80 degrees outside or 85 degrees outside, and just a few fans inside of those stores meant you moved very quickly, and you learned very quickly where things were, so you could get in and could get out pretty quick. But there were a few that were air conditioned, and we found one that wasn't too far away that their prices were still reasonable, and we were able to go down there and not sweat too much while you're trying to pick up the things you need, because we ate many times in the hotel room, and a few times we ate at the restaurant. But you didn't want to do that every day, so we'd eat at the hotel. But there was no microwave in the hotel, so you had to kind of be uh, careful about what you bought so you could prepare it back in the room. This next picture, you can see to the left, you have on the left side it's a Bank of the Marshall Islands. On the right, to the right of that, it says Marshall Islands Prevention Group, but actually below that it is the post office. And that was a pretty busy area, come about 9 o'clock, so that was a good area for us to also distribute Bible tracts and things like that. This next picture is looking down the street. If you came down out of the hotel parking lot, look to the right. This is what you would see. This is where we'd wait for the church van to come and pick us up in the evening. In the morning, normally we would just take a taxi because the van was used so much to pick up members. On the Lord's Day, it was pretty busy or pretty full, so we would just take a taxi down to the hotel or to the church building rather. You can see to the left, you see something called KLG. That's not the KFC. We ate there once, and it didn't like me very much. So the food didn't like me very much, so I wasn't too excited to go back. So we just went the one time. But we would walk down this street a lot, and there were several grocery stores. It doesn't look like it, but in all these different buildings, there's little markets and things all throughout. And I bet within a mile radius or a mile down the street, you'd have 6 or 7 little markets easily, probably more than that. But there was a larger grocery store down maybe half a mile that we would walk to that was air conditioned that we would use sometimes so that we didn't have to sweat while you're trying to shop and look for things to buy. This picture is actually just a picture of a start of a video that is attached on another section of this DVD, and the man in blue is one of the security guards. That's Stacy there, and the man is going to knock down a coconut, and then he would actually, well, you can see in the video, he actually would cut it open, and in this next picture, you can see the coconut where he has sliced it, and then cut out a hole where we could drink it. In the next picture you see I'm on the left and Stacy's on the right, and we're drinking the water from the coconut. Later that afternoon, my stomach was a little upset, and Stacy realized, he thought, well, maybe that coconut wasn't as mature as it should have been. We had coconut on 2 other occasions and it didn't bother me, but that one didn't like me very much. But coconut water tastes about what you would think. It's water that with coconut. So it was okay. It wasn't my favorite, but the others enjoyed it, so I wanted to do whatever they did to try to experience a few new things without getting ill. This next picture is again a picture that's actually a start of another video. The gentleman's going to cut out the coconut, or cut out the meat from the coconut. He's also was a member of the church that we were able to study with. He wasn't attending as he should, and we were able to study with him. And he actually was asked for we prayed with him or for him, and he asked to repent and come back to the church and attend faithfully. So he did that with. We had that study with him. I think beginning part of the second week that I was there. This next picture is just a picture of some bananas that were growing wild there on the island. You can see they're pretty green, but I thought it was a pretty neat picture of just bananas growing wild. This next picture is a picture of pandanus. It is a fruit there in the islands. There's a lot of it actually grown there by the hotel and gets pretty large. And kids would take, as you see in this next picture, you can see some of that's been pulled off, those little sections, and you would see kids walking around sucking on the other end of that section of that fruit. This next picture is a picture of fruit called breadfruit. They would cut that up, and sometimes different islands they would prepare it different ways. They would sometimes grill it and things like that, but one of the fruits, again, they would eat there on the island. I didn't have either the breadfruit or the pandanus. We just, I think the only fruit I had that was different was, drinking the coconut water. This next picture is a picture of the bus station. As you see there, it says with funding from the government of Japan. Japan would give the Republic of the Marshall Islands, as it's called, funds so they could build bus stops like this and pave their roads and be able to make the water tanks outside the houses that we'll look at in just a second. And in return for that, they would give Japan fishing rights in the waters there. So that's how they were able to do a lot of things there on the island, was with funding from Japan, and some other nations did similar things as well. This is typically what the homes would look like there on the islands. Block housing. Some may be painted and look a little bit nicer. Some may have a little bit larger yards instead of being back here in this little community, but for the most part, this is what it looked like there on the island. There wasn't a big difference in what people made. Everyone lived pretty much the same way. There was a lot of taxis on the island. We did see some who were driving, but for the most part, people either walked or took a taxi to where they were going. You can see in the picture that big green water tank, and you can see what looks like the gutter going down to it. Well, this next picture, you can see that is what's going on. The rainwater is coming off the roof, down through the gutter and into the water tank. And at the bottom of the water tank, they would take the water out, and then they would use that for their, bathing, and they would boil it when they'd get ready to do their cooking and things. And so that's the water that they used. Similar idea, it's the same type of water that we used there at the hotels I mentioned before. Only here they would, instead of having a pump, they would have to get it out of the tanks. This next picture here is one of the sites there on the island. It is a war memorial, a World War II memorial. This is, as you walk into it and turn to your left, this is what you would see. Some seating there. Then you can see the sidewalk, and as you walk down the sidewalk, this is, next slide, this is what you would see. It has the block on top. It kind of has been carved out, and it's carved out on both sides. On the left plaque, you have the writing in Marshallese, and in the center it's in Japanese, and on the right it's in English. And as you see in the next slide, it says, in memory of all those who sacrificed their lives in the islands and seas of the East Pacific during World War II, and in dedication to world peace. If you didn't know this, they actually back during that time, during those wars, they actually would test the atomic bomb on some of the other islands in the Marshall Islands, and so they played a part, at least in testing and some of the battles that were done there during World War II. And this next slide is again the same memorial. There wasn't a sign explaining what any of this was or represented. You can see Danny Jim sitting there on the right. He is one of the men we worked with while on the islands. We'll talk more about him in a moment. But you see different blocks, and this, all these concrete blocks are on. It's on a kind of concrete slab that was circle. And this next picture, you can see some others little concrete blocks set up on these different little areas. And I don't know if I doubt it's for seating. I don't know what it would be for, but that's what was all around this memorial. This next picture is a picture of a memorial for those who lived around 1904 or 1905. There was a typhoon that came through and killed a lot of folks and did a lot of damage, and this is a memorial to that. There's nothing written there in English that we could translate or anything. You can see some writing there on the left, but that's what that memorial is for. It's a for those who lived during that time or died during that typhoon. The islanders would tell you that those types of storms don't come through very often. In fact, they tell you that when the storms come through like that, when they get to the Marshall Islands, they're not very strong. But as they leave and head to the west, they get stronger and stronger before they hit the Philippines and the other islands. So they usually don't get hit by just super strong storms like that. But that happened back in 1904 or 1905. This next slide is a sign that you see as we went to the other end of the island. This says, "Welcome to Laura Village," and we actually had to pay to go on to the farthest side of it so we could see the ocean and things. The men there wanted to show me around just a little bit when we had some free time there in the afternoon. If a study didn't work out for time or something, I think after one of the studies we were already over on that side of the island, so we went on to Laura Village. In this next picture, you can see this is what you would see when you walked out. I think we paid $1 each for the three of us to go on out to that end of the island, so we could say we've been to that end of the island. And you can see, if you look far out, you can see other islands out there. But this is the far side of the island, the opposite end where we were staying at, and just a beautiful sight. And the next picture again, you can see some other islands out there as well. This next picture, this is not one that I took. You can see this lady walking across the reef. They tell you that once you step off the reef, that you're going to drop about 7 miles down into the ocean. That's how deep it is. And as soon as you cross over the reef, you're in shark country. Well, Danny Jim, as we'll talk about later, used to do some spear fishing. I'll tell you that story here in just a moment. But so when we were looking out, like we saw in the previous slide, looking out there and you see the waves crashing, well, where the waves started, start seeing the wide of the waves, that's where the reef was. And as soon as you stepped off, it's a big drop. So you want to be careful. In some places, the reef wasn't as far out as others. This next picture is the picture of the church sign, obviously there on the building. It says Yokeway. Yokeway can mean welcome. It can mean hello. It has several different meanings. But here on the sign, they use it to say welcome. This is the picture of the church building. The church building has been there, Danny said, about 10 years. It's actually in pretty good shape for being there so long, for being there for 10 years anyway. You see they have some, not really bars, but some protection over the windows to make sure no one gets in to steal what little things they do have there. No air conditioning or anything like that, but as we see in this next picture, you can see the ceiling fan and things there. That's Danny Jim on the left. He is one of the men we worked with. He was one of our translators. He was the translator, I should say, for the trip. He translated all the morning Bible classes, and it's on Sunday, or he translated the morning Bible class on Sunday. He translated for us our sermons in the morning and the evening. In our Bible class in the evenings, from Monday through Friday, those who came and understood English, so he got a break from translating, because when we went on our Bible studies, he would also translate those as well, because not everyone on the island understands English. Some only speak Marshallese, so he translated those for us. And on the right there, that's Stacy Ferguson, the assistant director of PIBC, who I went to the islands with. And now Danny, as I was mentioning before, when we saw the picture of the ocean there and the reef, he used to go out spearfishing. And one afternoon, while we were driving out to a study, he was telling me about one of the times he went spearfishing, and he was out in water about up to his waist, and he had the fish he had caught tied around his waist, and he had leaned forward to spear fish, and when he did, he felt something like sandpaper across his back. Well, it turned out it was a shark that had come up and grabbed one of the fish off his little rope that were tied around his waist, and he was laughing as he was telling us about it. But I thought, there's no way in the world they're going to get me out there spearfishing or doing anything like that. But the people on the islands, they can eat meat maybe once a week. Those who are poor are lucky to get meat once a week. Most of the time they eat rice. And because of that, there's many who are diabetic there on the islands, because the meat in stores is, for some, it's just too expensive for them to get. So when he went out when he was out with us during the week doing our Bible studies and things. Not every day, but some days he would go to lunch. He would go to lunch with us, and we buy his lunch. So he would, because he's out working with us so much, we wanted to help him any way we could, and that was one way to help him getting a meal, but that wasn't rice, and we're glad to be able to do that. This next picture is me teaching. I believe that's on a weeknight, teaching the PIBC course. I was teaching the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, and then Stacey Ferguson was teaching Christian Evidences, and we taught Monday through Friday for 2 weeks from 7 to 9 in the evening. This picture here shows those who were in the class. This isn't everyone, because there's some more to the right. We had about 30 enrolled. I think this is beginning the first week. We had about 30 enrolled, and we ended up having about 27 or 28 who took the test. And everyone did very well on the test that I gave them on Pentateuch. They took their second test that was on Stacy's class, the Christian Evidences, the second week. And the man there on the front, there in the white shirt and the brown shorts, his name is Eldon. And after he finishes taking the Christian Evidences course, he will be a graduate of PIBC. He has taken all the courses and met all the requirements for graduation. This next picture is just of a little boy. He was taking notes one night. He was actually taking notes from my class. He was copying down what was on the board. He has Leviticus there on the top of his page. And Stacy saw him doing that, and we thought it was pretty cute, so he took a picture of him doing that. There actually were a lot of kids who were there, as we saw in a previous picture, and many of them took the class and actually did take the test. Some just came with their parents, and this little boy would later be asleep on the pew when the classes were finally over, because they ended at 9 o'clock. This is a picture of Stacy Ferguson there to the left, and Danny Jim. This is out in front of one of the homes of those who we were studying with. And as I said before, Danny went with us everywhere. If we went somewhere for a study or to the school or to the church building to do the classes, he was our transportation, with the exception of Sunday morning and Sunday evening. This is the church van we used, or gospel chariot, for the week. Gas prices, as you see there on the screen, were between $5.60 to $6.60 a gallon. The church's contribution, when we got there, I think I saw it was about $35. So it takes, I forget how much it cost to fill up the van, but it was quite a bit. So their contribution primarily goes to keep that van running, to keep gas in it, and we were able to fill it up while we were there a few times, and help do some other things to keep the van in running order, because it's used so much with bringing people to services and going to Bible studies and things like that. And this next slide is some works that we were involved in while on the island. Private Bible studies, visiting and studying with unfaithful members, visiting the sick. As you'll see in a moment, you'll see a picture of the hospital that we visited. That was quite the experience. Also, we distributed Bible tracts, or signed up people for Bible correspondence courses. And after about a week and a half, I asked Stacy how many we had signed up, and it was close to 30. So that's a good number. Teaching and preaching on Sundays, and then teaching the PIBC classes each weeknight from 7 to 9. This next slide is a picture of the hospital. It looks decent here from the outside. When you go inside, though, it's not air conditioned except for certain areas. And as you can imagine, being hot and not have air conditioning in every area, you can see pretty quickly how it's not as sanitary as it should be. So the lady we went to visit had actually already gone home. But I'll tell you, I kept my hands in my pockets when we were walking through there. And when I got out, the first chance I got, I went and washed up the best I could. It's just a tough situation there, and be lucky that you don't have to go to that hospital. This is our schedule that we would normally use. There were a few times where Titus and Layla were at the hospital for their appointment, and we weren't able to study with them that morning. Sometimes we studied with them that afternoon. Sometimes we just had to wait. Titus actually told us he went to the hospital early one morning. He didn't get back to about 2 in the afternoon because there's always just a big crowd of people waiting to see or to be seen. But this is our Bible schedule. When we had our Bible studies, everything set up, and if someone wasn't able to study, we just did something else, whether it be passing out tracts or visiting the sick or trying to talk with someone who wasn't being as faithful as they should, or being faithful, period. Being on the islands, you have to get used to Bible time, or to, not Bible time, to island time, which means no one gets in a hurry. That's one of the reasons our Bible study was at 10 o'clock. We tried to leave at 9, but our ride didn't arrive until 9:30, sometimes 9:45. So our Bible study didn't happen until 10. But we'd have our Bible study with Titus and Nayla, and we'll see pictures of them here in just a moment. From 10 to 11:30, then have our Bible study with Pete from 12 to 1. And then we have lunch sometimes around 1:30 to 2 o'clock. And then in the afternoons, we would distribute Bible tracts and pass out Bible correspondence courses. We'd have supper around 5:30 or so, and then about 6:30 we'd be picked up by the van, and then we'd arrive at the church building around 7, and we would have our PIBC classes there from 7 till 9 in the evening. This next slide is me out passing out Bible courses, or this is me Bible tracts, and also correspondence courses. We actually had the 3 ladies there sign up for the Bible correspondence courses. You'll notice the green stick under my arm. Stacy told me when we first arrived that you want to keep some rocks in your hands for the dogs. Well, he found out one morning that while he was out jogging that the rocks weren't as effective as he had hoped. Another islander actually had to come to his rescue with a crowbar because he threw some rocks at some dogs who were coming at him, and then the islander came and scared the dogs off. And so he told me when he got back, he told me about it, and so we decided to take something with us, and that was what I picked up. It's actually off, if I remember correctly, I think it was off of a coconut tree or a fruit tree of some type anyway, and it was plenty hard, and we didn't have any problems that afternoon. This next picture is of Titus and Nayla. You had Nayla there on the left, then Titus, her husband, on the right. Then you have Danny, Jim, and then you also have these 3 girls who that day their school was canceled. The high tide came in on their side of the island, and actually the water came over the roads. So their school was canceled, and they just decided they were going to join us for that study that day. Nayla was actually attending a Muslim church, if that's what you want to call it, a church or a group. I'm not sure how they would phrase that, but that's where she was going. But Titus was coming to the church on Sunday mornings, not every time, because he had to take a taxi to get from his home to the church building. But the study was originally going to be with him, and she decided to join us, and she was with us every time we studied. We studied every day, I think with the exception of one day that we weren't able to study. But they studied with us, and she began to have more questions. We found out later on our last day there, or my last day there, that she was asking Titus a bunch of questions after we left. And the last day I was there, he just said, "Well, why don't you ask them? They're here right now." And so hopefully she'll learn the truth and decide to follow the Bible and not return to that Muslim group. There's a lot of different groups there on the islands. The Mormons are the largest, and Titus pointed out that the Mormon Church will pay for a person who is a member and has a loved one die. The Mormon Church will actually pay for their casket. He says that's one of the ways they attract people, the willingness to pay for things like that. But they were by far the largest group there on the island, with several church buildings on the island, at least 3 if not 4 just there on Majuro. This next picture is Pete there on the left, and then Danny and myself. I led this study with Pete, and Stacy led the other study with Titus and Nayla. And Pete, on the last day that I was there, four of his friends came with him. They wanted to listen, and so they came and listened and asked questions, and they went very well. And I'm hoping to hear back from Danny and from Stacy that the studies went well with him after I left also. So we had a lot of Bible studies on the islands, a lot of chances to encourage folks, and the trip was just very profitable. Now, this last picture is actually the beginning of another video. This is how the Islanders traditionally, as Denny would point out, this is how they did it. And they would ask me to come and sit down behind a table, and this is Wilson. He's on the ukulele. They were singing a song, and I asked Danny for the translation, but I haven't received it yet. But they would, as you see in the video that's on this DVD also, they're going to walk around the room, and he's playing on the ukulele, and they're giving their traditional goodbye, and they would actually set down some handcrafted gifts that they had brought as a farewell to me. And Stacy told me they do the same thing when he is there, and on any island they have different little send-offs that they do, and this is what they did. They just brought the ukulele in just for that one farewell there they were doing at the building. So that is the last slide for the report. And if you have any questions about the work that was done, just let me know. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have. And I appreciate all those who kept me in their prayers, and all those who gave us support financially. And Lord willing, and perhaps sometime in the future, I'll be able to return there and work with those there in Majuro, as they were a good group of folks who worked very hard to do all they could for the Lord. We want to keep them in our prayers. So if you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. I'll be glad to answer them. And that is going to bring an end to the report of my work that we did there on the island of Majuro in the Marshall Islands.